The webinar today is going to be looking at various aspects of performance management, how we can get this right. We're going to be looking at climate. I'm going to be describing some aspects of performance management as analog versus digital. We will be looking at culture and climate and how it's the responsibility of managers to really create that, and what an amazing opportunity to use performance management as a tool, as a driver for connecting people with the purpose of their organisations and their own individual roles in that purpose. So we run People and Culture Essentials webinars approximately fortnightly at the TCM. So if you've joined us before, you'll have some idea of the format. We aim for 30 minutes, often with questions we go a bit further, and really welcome to stay online afterwards to join us for a longer time if you particularly have some points you'd like to cover. But I'm going to try and stick today within the 30 minutes. So the whole session is recorded, and obviously we do that so that we can share it afterwards, and I'll also be sharing the slides. Okay, so welcomes to everybody, and I know that so far we've got touching on around 30 participants at the moment, which is superb. Please do drop a line in the chat box as we go along. Okay, so so we're going to be looking at some of the perceptions and misconceptions of performance management. We're going to be talking about two really important aspects for excellence in performance management. And this term, it's analog. Let's get over the fact that we are often driven through our performance management system as through a digital approach. It's a tool. There are forms to fill, etc. But we need to remember, actually, these are human interactions. This is actually quite an old-fashioned process. It's an exchange of really important information, but really can be backed up by such valuable tools and resources. And that's not to say that they're not really important. The evidence base and the data that goes with performance management is so valuable. And yet, of course, it's the human interaction that really drives us to be able to extract the value from that data and use it to our advantage so we can really engage team members. We're going to then really sort of the new aspect of building and sustaining our sort of high-performing organisations, productivity through performance management. That comes through relationship, relating what we do to the climate that's created and the values that are lived. And of course, HR have a really important role in this. So we'll be touching on each one of those topics. I've mentioned the timing, it's recorded. There will be opportunities to answer and ask questions as well. And following this, if it would be interesting to have a free consultation with myself, members of the TCM team, do get in touch. That's something that we're always really keen to do. And really very much on the basis of recommendations for you to implement. We're very happy to share how we can help you do that. But it's a much stronger influence at this point for us as we're building up our engaged leadership suite to just engage with you and have those conversations. Okay, so let's make a start. I've got some perceptions here of performance management, and these are perceptions that I've collated through research over the years working with leaders, working with team members. I've been working in leadership development for more than 15 years here in the UK, in the Middle East, in Europe. And these are perceptions that have come up through much of the performance management training that we've done, but also just generally. And I've just grouped them because obviously there are so many. I'd just like you to just cast your eyes over some of those positive and potentially negative comments. In fact, I've just realized my positive and negative are the wrong way round, aren't they? So if we could look at the top ones as the negative and the bottom ones as the positive, that would be far more interesting. Okay, all right. And I'm going to just run a poll very quickly. Those are some of views from other people. Now, I'm going to run a poll. I'm going to ask you which most closely describes perceptions of performance management for you or in your organisation. I'm going to launch this poll. You have actually 4 options. So if everyone on the call right now could just start polling, you're able to answer the poll by selecting one of those or one of those choices. And it doesn't need to relate specifically to your organisation. Perhaps it's just perceptions built up over a career of how you think performance management is most generally perceived. Okay. All right, fantastic. Thank you. You've got really high proportion of the group answering that. Nearly everybody's done. So I'll just give it another minute or two. Okay, fantastic. So by far the vast majority here are seeing this as a time-consuming process driven by necessity. And okay, but some are definitely, so we've got 21% of people seeing that it is very much to promote engagement, which is really fantastic. And so some of us are having this experience, but unfortunately, the vast majority are seeing this really more as a necessary, perhaps a necessary evil. We can interpret from that quick poll. Right, so I'm sharing the results now. As you can see, 50% a time-consuming process-driven necessity. Okay, so process-driven. Now, in terms of the processes, could I just ask you to comment as we go along? At any moment, do drop a note into the chat, and I'll keep coming back to that. The chat box is a really nice tool just for you to randomly drop in comments. They don't necessarily have to be in relation to a specific question I'm asking. They are, please, anything that you think could be relevant to the wider group to consider. But we think it's process-driven necessity. All right, in that case, some of those negative comments that I shared earlier are very similar to these. We're going to therefore look together at how we can improve this process. So some of the paradox, if you like, of performance management, we're often torn between these two possibly opposing aspects. The emphasis on technology or humanity, where does the emphasis lie? What's the weighting between those two? Probably over the past 10 to 15 years, in most medium to large size organizations, performance management is driven through an online system, be that SAP or Workday or really any of the programs that you use in your organization. So that can sometimes lead to the whole process of performance management feeling actually quite like a form fill, an online form fill. And I've certainly been in sessions, I don't know about you, with managers saying, right, so what do we need to do here? And looking at the different boxes and the different criteria, various elements that we have to address through the form. And really that being the focus, even having that form open between us to go through, rather than, I think, what could be a really rich conversation, a conversation that focuses very much more on what we're trying to achieve together, and what the employee's role is in achieving that, perhaps some of the successes individually and through teams and so on. So that's what we mean by the technology or humanity. So humanity plays a really important role. If we're going to have valuable conversations, they need to be authentic. So I'd just like comments, please, on how perhaps the technology might get in the way of humanity, or perhaps vice versa, whether you feel in your organisation this has been tackled really well, these potential opposing forces which can cause tension in the ability to have a really good performance management process. So feedback, please, in the chat. I'd really appreciate any comments there, and we can come to those. And then I mentioned briefly then in that need to have an excellent conversation, which is really engaging and commitment inducing. We need to look at both the individual contribution and team collaboration. The last PACE workshop that we were running, we did look at actually increasing and sustaining productivity through collaboration being a major theme. And yet a lot of our performance management goals are focused around our individual contribution. And I have rarely seen this done well. If in fact the majority of value an individual adds to an organisation is through their part as a team member, then we need to build in the ability to recognise and measure their contribution. Now, that might be through hard measures, and it might also be through behaviours, because we know that behaviour is absolutely key to really excellent teamwork. And communication and interpersonal skills are part of that, but also just having that proactivity and a spirit of collaboration that really runs through a team and is acted out through each individual. Okay, and then returning to this word humanity, a focus on results or on humanity. So are we looking only at what people do or how they are doing it? So how they are living the values and how they are contributing to a positive climate. Is this something that we're really recognising, rewarding, and even exploring and interrogating in really good performance management conversations? So could I have your views, please, on that last point? Are we results focused or behaviour focused? What does that look like in your organisation? So quite a big group between us today. So if I could have a couple of thoughts, this is an interactive session. I will move on, obviously, if people are a bit reticent to share at this point. But okay, fantastic, thank you. So Mark, brilliant. So really, actually, behaviour focused. Both from Terry, thank you very much, and others saying. Okay, more results focused, yeah, and really that has been the experience of most people. You know, the research that I've done in this area, in my work over the past 15 years, seems to, and managers find it quite difficult to move from that results focus, actually creating a really rigorous and objective format. Because of course that's what data gives us, isn't it? It does give us that objectivity, and our subjectivity can sometimes risk, or because our fear of being subjective may hinder our willingness to bring comments around behaviour and values and so on. After all, it's often only what we see ourselves versus something that's measurable. So moving to behaviours, but still on that journey. Thank you, Damien. Paul, thank you both. Gillian, I think we're mostly results focused. Yeah, well, as I say, very, very common. Konstantinos, thank you. One of the biggest pain points, you say, is that deep-rooted culture, okay, that reproduces the notion that PM process is simply procedural. And that's right. I mean, it's a fantastic tool. We can do so much with performance management data, but of course that it is only a tool, and it is not the function and the action itself. It's a good tool. It helps us to collate great data. We can see where the hot spots are for high performance or perhaps low performance, and engagement, which is what we normally correlate as low performance. So we can then use that to work on and help managers improve in their areas. But that data collation isn't the end in itself, of course. Okay, so thanks very much for those contributions. So I guess one of the reasons we're here is to try and optimize this process and share some ideas around that. So really, as a community of practice, the TCM community are here to encourage this sharing of information. So heartening to see so many organisations moving to behaviours. So it looks like most of us are actually in the middle of that journey, and some of us really haven't perhaps started yet, but hopefully obviously starting to think about it. So I mentioned the analogue and the digital. So the importance of engaging and motivating people. So in terms of this being one of those key points in the calendar where we can motivate and engage people through great dialogue, not through digital process, not using online forms, but not forgetting the value of data and evidence. Now, one of the ways that we can use this, of course, is to collate data around qualitative data around engagement, around values, and so on. And if we do that and then share that on a regular basis through pulse surveys, for example, we can then build in that information into the kind of conversations we have. So what we're proposing here is that there really are two needs and two important aspects. It's just not to let the digital, not to let the data dominate, and in fact to use the data to inform those conversations. So how we train our managers to do that is obviously, a big question, but they do have data at their fingertips. They can see themselves whether results in their areas are improving or diminishing. And when those changes happen, those are prompts for good conversations, not just the crisis management to get things back on track, and not just the recognizing fantastic performance, which is important, but right, what evidence is this of what we need to do more of or less of or improve on? So being able to move, that shift the whole tone of conversation in performance management to this much more person-focused approach is what we're suggesting here. It's a fantastic opportunity, if not the best opportunity, for engagement. So what our challenge is, and has always been really, is that it's managers that really drive culture and climate in organisations. So at the senior level, it's the executive team that often set and define the culture. It's managers then that drive the culture and create that sort of the microclimate within their own teams. And of course, it's the culture and climate that's lived by individuals in the teams, and they contribute to it too. So these are important things to consider as well when we're measuring performance, the contribution that any individual does make to the culture and the climate, and the positive and perhaps areas for improvement. So if managers' behaviour really drives this culture and climate, what we're looking for are their actions. So perhaps some of the behaviours, but also some of the tasks that are set and how they are measured. Their reactions, how they react, as I mentioned before, to the positive and the negative and to others' behaviours. And really how they promote different interactions to enable collaboration and really high quality teamwork. It's only by having an ongoing focus on this, and people only focus on what they value. So as organisations, the important point here is to be able to highlight to managers, this is their role. The task is so important, and measuring and keeping people's objectives on track. But really, that will happen not just through the expert techniques that are used in work and the hard skills, and not only through the measurement of objectives, but actually also having culture as an important task in itself and seeing that as something, nurturing that, growing that, defining it is a core leadership competency that needs to be developed and responsibility. Could I just ask, within our group today, how many people in the organisation see themselves as personally responsible for the culture, for contributing or creating the culture? Now, of course, none of us are 100% responsible, but I do see myself as, for example, as responsible for contributing towards the culture. How many people in your organisation, if we were to say 80%, 50%, most, not many, whichever measure you'd like to use, just to give me some idea, because we often see it as somebody else's job to do this, and that we are just sort of passive receivers of culture. Okay, brilliant. So, the times are shifting. These are different answers to what we would have received. So I'm going to take this as a massive positive, but still in some organisations not enough. So sure, so more at senior levels, they're stepping into that responsibility, leaning in, as we say, to that idea that that they create the climate, that they are responsible for that. We're all responsible, absolutely. And if only a third of the organisation, thank you, Terry, again, if only a third of us in an organisation feel that we are responsible for creating and driving that, then we've got 2/3 of the organisation passively receiving the culture, and probably not contributing to it that positively either. Okay, thank you, Veronica, 40%, yeah. So we're definitely going to lay the responsibility of the senior staff. Why? Because they are the role models. They are the most significant influencers in organisations. And so we need to see them speaking about the culture as if they own it, not something that just happens to be around here. And that's a slight mind shift for some people in organisations. And that no doubt has built up over time and through the role modelling behaviour of others being not so positive. Okay, so why we see the power as being in the analog rather than the digital is because it is still, whatever we do and however clever we are, developing these lovely measures, KPIs and so on for behaviour, for values and climate. It's really the conversations that are going to put the emphasis on this in organisations. Our recent conference with the NHS, for those of NHS colleagues with us today who might have attended that, so much of what was coming from our colleagues in the NHS was obviously people have got to where they are in senior management, very often through their technical skills, clearly clinical excellence. But very often it's the absence of leadership behaviours that drive positive engagement and motivation through the climate that's created. And so these conversations are absolutely core. They're not just 50%. So honing this, but how often are we training people not just to go through objectives in a really good and perhaps coaching style, but being able to actually look into values and behaviours? I have seen more recently, well, I'd say over the last 5 years, performance management systems where the values are aligned and in fact our achievement of objectives is related to values. And yet when I speak to people about the quality of those conversations, it seems that there isn't a great deal of depth when they are relating what needs to be done with values. And that's where we need to build. So through engaging managers in a process of understanding and defining, okay, so these are the values, so what behaviors really align with these values and which don't actually, which behaviors don't we want to see because they actually clash with the values, they work against what we're trying to achieve, and relating that to the purpose, but more importantly the everyday, creating everyday meaning that truly relates to the jobs that we do. Okay, can you please give some examples? Thank you, Konstantinos, for your question. Yeah, I can. So if I'm sitting down with a manager and asking him or her to explain the approach that they take to build and drive a positive culture in their organisation, they will often come to the 6 dimensions of climate. They will start to talk about things like clarity, that through conversations they create real clarity about what's happening in the organisation and what the goals are and what the individual objectives are for each individual. And those are really, powerful conversations, because actually clarity is the most significant aspect of climate. We do need to know what it is we're supposed to be doing. But then we come on to standards. So, okay, if you want me to jump, it's by how much, that old-fashioned saying. And that's really important too. So this is what I need to do. This is by how much. But now what I would say analog, and I mean that because it's not so digitally powered, this kind of conversation. It's much more through human interaction. Not just the what, not just the how much, but also the and through which means that actually the how am I going to do that? Not only how much, but how am I going to deliver that. And that, of course, needs to be with respect and dignity for colleagues. It needs to be with a spirit of collaboration, so that I share the knowledge that I have and I proactively go and get information and knowledge and help from others, so that I can do my work as efficiently as possible. And as an organisation, we're really coherent and can work in synergy. So that's really an example of what managers can do. They can approach any conversation and it really improves the climate, because I leave that discussion with clarity, even more clarity than perhaps I had before, about what it is I'm supposed to be doing and why, the how much, the standards to which we need to all work, and then how, the values and behaviours I need to be living, demonstrating, and role modelling as well for my peers. So we all need to be role models, not just as managers, but as team members. Okay, so these are some of the approaches that we know work really well in organisations, and they are alive and well. We know they are already working very, very nicely in lots of organisations. So check-ins. So most managers, be it through a formal process, be it through a quick Monday meeting, or more informal day-to-day, making sure they do their walk around their teams in old-fashioned terms, face-to-face, and probably more regularly now through just dropping in and having a quick Teams or Zoom call with each person. But those are really important check-ins. So performance management isn't the 3 meetings a year, it's a day-to-day check-in. That's performance management. We might write a few more aspects of this down, of course, in those 3 meetings a year or 4 meetings a year, but performance management is day-to-day, and it's frequent conversations, not only one-to-one, but between team leaders and team members as a group, about the work that's on, about what the priorities are for today and tomorrow, and why these are priorities now, perhaps they weren't last week. Being able to give that visionary leadership, where we are translating what we're seeing on the horizon for our organisation, and what we can see that perhaps they don't have the day-to-day perspective to see, but we do as the leaders, and we translate that to the team and explain, okay, what we're doing today might change over the coming few weeks or few days or even hours, depending on the nature of our work. We want to also be able to feed back when we see perhaps the positive and the not so good, as I mentioned earlier, so that we can talk about as a group and as individuals what we need to stop, start and continue. If we can relate regularly the performance that we're seeing, and it's often not clear, as managers, we might assume that people have quite good visibility, they can sense the tone or the mood, the temperature in the organisation, in the company or organisation, but actually often they can't. People can be very focused on their own work and don't have that really reliable sense of how well we are doing as an organisation. And of course that's so important. And I mentioned earlier about sort of the positive aspects of data, pulse surveys, and using these as a quick tool. We're all probably quite familiar with the biannual employee engagement surveys, where it's quite a long process. We're all involved and we receive the feedback and then action planning. But actually a quick pulse survey can be done almost weekly, not to add extra process. These can be done even through our own email processes, SurveyMonkey, whatever we want to do. But these are quick check-ins and in fact should really relate to those aspects of climate that we want to be able to track how people are doing. Can people be mischievous in their answers and perhaps derail this sometimes? Yes, and that's often the argument I hear against using surveys. And particularly a team that perhaps has a low mood, that isn't feeling they're doing so well. And a manager can be quite bruised by these processes. I really accept that. On the other hand, of course, that is data in itself. We need to use these sensitively and well. We need to go back to the team and say, hey, I don't understand this. I've received some feedback that isn't entirely adding up, but please do explain it to us, to me. Let's share this rather than just let it go on. So pulse surveys can be fantastic. And what we would rather do is encourage people to be able to keep sharing information, sometimes anonymously, but not always. We do need to perhaps hold people account sometimes for their feedback, which is fine, provided it's done in a positive way. Could I just ask for some feedback on where you've seen and where you've used any of these, and where you've seen it really work in best practice? If we've got some examples of really good best practice, that would be fantastic. I'll give everybody a moment to think about that. I think perhaps just in the interim, I will share. I worked in a large organisation, a large manufacturing organisation that really went through a big shift in culture during the 7 years that I was there. And where we got to was actually a real thirst for information among functional heads, which was a massive transition from where we started. We started with a real fear for 360 feedback. It had been rolled out. And any suggestion of quick sort of interim feedback outside of the major employee engagement exercise was really resisted. Any drilling down into the areas of success or negative results was also really resisted fiercely. But over time, actually, managers started to see this as important information, absolutely important, because they realised and really bought into the link between engagement and productivity. And they knew if they had problems, they didn't have enough wriggle room between what was possible in terms of productivity and what their targets were. And actually, they had to always be operating at optimum productivity. That required optimum engagement. So they did get to a point, and that was a very positive conversation. It worked very well. So okay, thank you. I'm receiving some feedback, which is superb on the chat. So yeah, use all of them, Paul. Brilliant. That everyday performance and development. It really does, doesn't it, encourage continuous performance discussions, and it's night and day between that ongoing and the 3 times a year culture where we are only checking in. And I have spoken to people who've got serious issues, and I say, well, when are you going to be able to raise this with perhaps your senior manager or with your team members, if I'm speaking to a manager about their team's behaviour? And they'll say, well, we've got the appraisals coming up early December or perhaps early January, and that's a really good opportunity. And that can be a couple of months away from the time of conversation. So ongoing versus just rare periodical, far better. Thank you. And Konstantin asks, brilliant. So continuous discussions. Okay, so that sincere interest is brilliant. Yeah, peer review, brilliant. Yeah, peer review can be really valuable. Again, I often, the arguments against peer review are often around some of the negative aspects of people using it as a tool, perhaps to be a little bit unfair. But of course, feedback is always valuable, even if it isn't always accurate. Weekly check-ins, okay. Fantastic. So where is the new in what we're suggesting here? I don't think there is, a magic bullet here in performance management. We've talked about the analog. It's just really optimizing that. Now, if we can optimize these conversations, not just around the values that are written and the objectives that are written in our performance management systems, but actually encourage and train managers to be able to drill down, to have excellent conversations that links their objectives with the values and their behaviours. That's what we need to do. We need to reinforce, though, that the systems are very valuable. They do allow us to collect this data, those pulse surveys or information collecting, whatever sense. That can also be done within a team. Data is obviously also qualitative from team meetings, but what we're looking for are perceptions on aspects of team climate. We can use this data analysis to track trends. It's really helpful for this low and high performance hotspot identification. And we use this as a source of, it's a call to action. It's not a call for necessarily addressing management capability per se, but it does indicate that some emphasis is needed, and perhaps there are some factors in parts of organisation driven possibly by leader behaviour, but not necessarily. There could also be factors impacting that are right outside of that. And really, we need to respond with real-time conversations, and this conversation is obviously absolutely core. So how do we train managers? How do we train ourselves to have better conversations? Well, I mentioned climate, I mentioned clarity and standards as being really important aspects of climate. There are six that in TCM we would see six of these as being absolutely core to creating a positive climate. And so what we can do is train leaders to relate to each one of these as they think about engagement in their teams. So by flexibility, I don't just mean flexible working, but I mean generally, how adaptable are our systems? How do they, in fact, ensure that everybody can go to work and go about their work without so much red tape that becomes a problem for them? Flexibility to adapt and remove unnecessary systems, and managers taking a champion's role in addressing this, particularly if those are systems that come from the centre. Because this can really get us down, of course, if it gets in the way of us doing our jobs well. Responsibility, the sense of responsibility that we have within our team. So we said, how responsible do we all feel for the climate that we create? A manager will be able to gauge this, but it's a good conversation to have with people around the fact that we're all part of this and we all create the climate, and ask people perhaps where they feel their strengths are in contributing to the climate, and focusing on the positives particularly. Rewards, recognising people very specifically. A general reward, everything's going great, guys, is fantastic, but doesn't, the research suggests, doesn't actually contribute to a positive climate. It makes us all feel good for a few seconds. However, when we are recognised for something that we have put effort into, and perhaps our best thinking and our energies, and that is recognised specifically, then we know that does actually impact on an individual's commitment and engagement, and therefore the climate of the team. And a team being rewarded as well, quite specifically for what's been good this week. And that builds on another important aspect, which is team commitment. You will see, if you're a manager of a team, that the level of commitment of each individual, and not just to task, but to each other. And where we do see breakdowns in commitment to each other, it's to be addressed and acknowledged, and really the root causes. And it's no one individual's responsibility to put that right. It generally, obviously there are exceptions, but generally it's the responsibility of two or more people to build team commitment, rather than it be caused by just one person if there is a lack of it. So if managers are actually able to sit back on a weekly basis and think, right, how are we doing in each of these areas, I can guarantee that they can find some way of improving in each of these areas. If we break climate and culture down so it's digestible, then we can all find a way perhaps of addressing flexibility, for example. Okay, so Konstantinos, your question about examples to really make this analogue come to life, it's really by linking performance to this climate, using those 6 dimensions, I would say, are valuable. That's certainly what we would be using at TCM, but there are different definitions, different models, but these are ones that seem to have stood the test of time. So if we link performance always to climate and engagement, where we don't see good performance, it will come back to either an individual sense of engagement or the climate generally. And of course that they are linked, because if the climate is poor, it's very difficult for everybody to be highly engaged. And then to their own values and behaviour. And it could also be important to highlight where behaviour is misaligned with values. That can be a misunderstanding. We certainly see that in conflict management, where we see managers perhaps seeking formal routes to resolve conflict because they think that's what's professional, they think that's what's needed. Whereas, of course, we would always emphasise that their attempts to nip issues in the bud is the more professional route. But we do find people having a misconception around that. And so a leader can quite quickly reorientate behaviour just through clarity. around what's expected and what's actually healthy here. Of course, it could be different compared to what was healthy in another organisation. So as managers, we do need to be proactive in recognising the positive. We need to encourage ways that people behave to achieve their objectives. The ruthless competitive spirit that can actually be driven by performance management systems where we have very individualized targets. It generally does drive negative, not values-driven behaviour, and we see that. If we can look at even in the media, there are fantastic examples and films and series where you have salespeople are obviously the example that we will relate to perhaps, and where in fact competition, far from driving collaboration and overall shared success, can divide people. And where we do have those individual goals, that's fantastic, because a lot of our work can be individual, but being able to then switch to be collaborative and be able to measure and recognize collaborative working is really important. If that's what we want to drive, we do get what we measure, as they say. Finally, we talked about how managers might be defining positive behavior and perhaps writing some misconceptions, so correcting some misconceptions around values and behavior. But when they do see behavior, even from a high performer, and often from a high performer perhaps, who are so task driven and perhaps quite individualized in their task driven behavior, are we addressing the negative behaviours that we see? I certainly have had managers who are fearful they may demotivate a high performer who individually does so well but does have a negative impact on the team. Unfortunately, those people are prima donnas potentially, or they're prima donnas in waiting. We need the whole team to be engaged, and the negative impact they can have on the team as on a day-to-day basis, or even just role modeling behaviours which will be adopted by other high potentials in the team. So we need to have the nerve, if you like, to address that too. Yeah, so Konstantinos, hopefully that addresses some of what you said here. How to assess counterproductive work behaviours. Now, in data terms, yes, by asking questions. I would say asking questions around behaviours, around what people experience. That can certainly be built into pulse surveys. We can also look at that through team feedback, the free flow aspects of team feedback, and as complex as that does make, collating large numbers of responses to feedback. We do always need that free flow, and negative behaviours will come through that. Interestingly, people are rarely in those qualitative comment boxes, they're rarely talking about the task. They might be talking about the process, or they might be talking about behaviours, but if you specifically prompt those questions around behaviours, people won't hold back from talking about the negative. How do we then address those? Through conversation, and those could start at a team level, being just very general about what we share in terms of our goals, and therefore the values that are going to allow us to achieve them, and the behaviours that underpin those values and those that aren't helpful. And to a certain extent, that in itself can be extremely powerful. People don't like to, but most people show up at work with good intention. They don't like to work against the grain. And while it might be a little bruising to have some of their behaviour pointed out as being negative, if that's handled sensitively, then we can address it. And we need to just keep coming back to it. It might not be intentional, of course, so gentle reminders are incredibly powerful. People are great learners. People aren't just given to us fully formed in our teams, and we have to deal with that. People do develop, and provided feedback is given well and can be received in the spirit of development and learning, particularly encouraging people to say, look, I know you can do this. You do so much so well. This is one area that would really benefit the team, and they can see the point of it. This is going to take energy to change. If they can see the point of it, then most people will. Now, that might seem a little bit trite, but that would be a good starting point. How we build that into performance management, by actually measuring not just on the what's achieved, but the how. And in people's performance rating, or whatever it is that you use in your organizations, and being brave enough to reflect that. And managers saying that you did achieve the target, but it really wasn't acceptable, some of the ways that you did it. Of course, that is why it's so important to define those values and behaviours at the beginning, because if at the end of the year people feel they've been mistreated because they have achieved their targets, perhaps no matter what, but they have achieved their targets and it wasn't clear to them the expectations of behaviour, perhaps they may well have a point, and it's not fair to measure them that way. But we can build this in, and that we need to trust our managers to be making some really good decisions, and we need to train our managers to do that. Okay, so those are my tips. We've touched on each one of these as we've gone through. Values-based performance management would be the summary. Values-based leadership is really what I would recommend as being a priority. In fact, a matter of urgency in our organisations right now. We've become actually very good at automating, driving excellent processes, aligning people with them and training them to use them. But it's the values, and they are creeping in. It's so fantastic, the feedback that we heard earlier. So several of you have contributed, said, yeah, we are doing this and we're moving in that direction. So we need to be able to look at these and consider them as measurable aspects of performance, where we're collating information around where we're seeing values being lived out through behaviours. We need to relate how goals are achieved to success, not just what goals and to the extent, but really how goals are achieved. So how we go about achieving what's required of us. It's not just about hitting the target. We're used to having fantastic overachievers, hopefully, in our organisations. I've certainly worked with a few, so driven and so on. And the best do it well. People can achieve goals while still being excellent team members, great individuals that stay connected to their own humanity. How they do that, I am sure they've had great role models as managers in their lives. Perhaps instinctively, a few brilliant few can do both, but we need to enable that by measuring it, recognizing it, encouraging it, talking about it. Very few of us can do everything instinctively, and it's the role of managers and the HR team, which is really what I'm going to come on to next, to highlight the importance of this. We need to address misaligned behaviours, and we need to keep providing really tangible examples. I mean, your question there, Konstantinos, was to provide examples, and I need to do that. We need to do that in organisations. It's the responsibility of the HR team to perhaps shine a spotlight where this is going on really well, as managers to role model this by talking, sharing great stories, doing that by recognising good performance that we've seen, but perhaps also shining a spotlight on excellent examples in other parts of the organisation. So where we see perhaps it's not working well in our own teams, but where we can see it happening elsewhere, why not shine a spotlight and say, hey guys, we can work as well as those over there. And highlighting the risks and opportunities of different approaches, of course. But mostly the opportunities. That the risk is perhaps time and energy is spent in directions that people don't always value. Behaviour can be seen as rather soft and fluffy and not always valued. But the risks of not doing that we need to highlight, and the opportunities that we can achieve. And using real examples can be great ways of doing that. And that really needs to come from our own organisations if possible, because we'll relate to the similar, the familiar. But if not, then obviously look elsewhere. Look at what other organisations are doing. Come and speak to us at TCM, for example. We can share some information. Look at our website where we've got some great testimonials and examples too, all there for you just to obviously to use. And we're always really happy to talk about those and to support you. Okay, avoid the vague descriptions, keep it specific. So we can prepare them well. We can certainly, through coaching, through training, help managers understand a few important areas. One certainly is change management. So change management is just ongoing and is certainly going to be cropping up in performance management conversations. We need them to be able to have these conversations well, with good structure, with confidence, so they feel really capable of walking into these conversations. They know where they're going. They know that they are talking about the task, but they're also talking about how that relates to behaviours and how that's going to enable success in the future. Values-based leadership, we live and talk the language of values. And as leaders, we keep reinforcing this at TCM. And from the work that we did at the NHS conference recently, we saw this being more and more important to organisations where values perhaps aren't being lived. The consequences are so damaging and really so unfortunate, where people are putting a great deal of effort and energy and expertise into working together, but not in a values-driven manner. The art of personal impact, really understanding that creating that level of self-awareness as managers, we do have an impact every day on teams that we lead. And as role models, we can be really powerful. We can really multiply the capability, the intelligence of our teams by making the climate right for them to collaborate. Or we can diminish. We can actually diminish people. We can make them feel less capable. We can diminish the capability of a team to collaborate. And that personal impact is so important. And when managers have spent a little bit of time thinking about the impact they have on their teams through their language, through their behaviour, what they reward, recognise, or alternatively, what they don't address, what they ignore and accept, once this starts to be seen by managers as an important task and one on their agenda that needs to be addressed every day, they really can make enormous improvements in the impact they have on their team performance overall, and obviously through the engagement levels. We've not mentioned wellness, diversity and inclusion, but this is something to build in now to our performance management systems, because it's, time has moved on. We do recognise that the workplace isn't always truly inclusive, and be that for really any protected characteristic, be that gender or race or sexuality, disability, even some of the responsibilities we might have outside of work as carers and parents, for example. All of these affect how included we are. And we need to acknowledge these through our performance management systems. And that's going to be one of a core topic actually of an upcoming webinar. So we'll publish the dates for that. How we recognise, reward, address and improve the wellness, diversity and inclusion. But essentially, as a value in most of our organisations, and certainly one that if it's not an explicit value on the wall, it's one that will be really underpinning how we work and what our organisation says we stand for. This is something that should form an important aspect of that conversation, that valuable conversation. So that's really the key points for us in performance management. It's really shifting the emphasis of performance management to the conversation, to the values and behaviours that we are rewarding, recognising, not tolerating and addressing. So I'd just like to open up to chat. Could I do that first through a question, which is the extent to which inclusion is a part of the performance management conversation in our organisations at the moment, and that will be a nice preview into the next webinar that I'll be running in a few weeks' time. So in your organisations, inclusion as an aspect of performance management, to what extent does that come into our conversations? Paul, so Paul, now what I'm going to do actually is shift, I'll stop sharing and shift now onto our tile view. Anybody who would be willing to perhaps unmute and give us a little bit of an explanation as to what's going on in their organisation, that would be fantastic. Okay, so fantastic comments from Paul and Terry. If I don't know if either of you wouldn't mind just giving us.
Want me to give a little bit more
Paul,
detail?
yes, thank you, Paul.
So I work at HSBC, and certainly diversity and inclusion is very much high on the agenda of things we're doing. So we're looking at the mix of our colleagues, and we want to ensure that people of different backgrounds, of different genders, of different ethnic origins are progressing. So certainly we're looking, as part of that, our development and performance management processes are being reviewed so that we can ensure that people are getting those opportunities through performance and development to progress through the organisation, and uncovering any unconscious biases or you know, unconscious issues in the system that we haven't been aware of, that we need to resolve in order to allow those people to move forward.
Okay, fantastic, Paul. And what do you think has been perhaps the main approach that you've taken to ensuring that managers are confident to do that, take that responsibility for that important aspect of climate?
Yeah, I think I'm on a project called a People Managers Project, where we're looking at people managers of the future. And I think something you mentioned earlier on is that there's a wealth of tools out there, and HSBC certainly has a wealth of tools. But one thing we're trying to do is to really give managers incentives to actually use the tools that we create. So we've got a well-being microsite, we've got change management modules, you know, we've got modules around difficult conversations, all those things you've spoken about. But it's actually encouraging managers that managing their teams, people management, is just as important as clinching that sale or launching that new product. You know, it's got to be on the same level as all those things. It's a key part of their job. So one thing we're focusing on very heavily is how do we actually get managers into that mindset, which goes back to what you said about culture, to actually get them you know, seeing performance management and team engagement as such key areas as other areas of their job description.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. Do you find that so you're training your managers to do that, and they're then all moving in that direction? And you know, in terms of your priority right now, if you wouldn't mind sharing, Paul, what would you say would be the priority sort of right now, given where we are this year?
I think we class ourselves, like many organizations, as in business continuity mode at the moment.
Yeah.
So, you know, we are waiting to see what the future world is going to look like. However, we're already, like many organizations, proactively planning for the options that we're going to give people in the future. And from a people management perspective, we're thinking about, well, if, for example, people are working from home in the future or working different working patterns, then how does that impact on the people managers of the future and how they do things like performance management when performance reviews, for example, may be via Zoom as opposed to in the office? So I think the priority at the moment, or one of the priorities, is thinking about the future of work and what that will look like for both individuals and management as well.
Okay, brilliant. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Thanks very much for those insights. And I won't keep putting you on the spot. I could interview you actually probably all morning. So
unfortunately, I can't off now, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right. So anybody else just like to share examples of perhaps best practice in their organisations, just as Paul did then? Putting people on the spot. Okay, well, really respecting people's time, I'm going to wind up the discussion. One of the things that we can do, as I mentioned, is come into an organisation, and at the moment, as just as Paul mentioned there, by Zoom, no doubt. But as things start opening up, really looking forward to obviously getting back out to working together. So yeah, we offer free pulse surveys. We do 3 levels of survey that really helps look at leadership effectiveness and organisation effectiveness. So if that's of interest, the first level is conversation. It's probably last around an hour. I would be doing that myself and perhaps bringing in other members of the team. We provide you with a report, 3 to 4 page reports, where we sort of highlight some of the priorities that no doubt we will have talked through. And the second level is a silver, and then there's a gold. So, you know, really as part of that building into what we've said, the digital or the data, the evidence collation is important as much as the analog. When we go into the silver and the gold surveys, we're bringing in other evidence and data that you might have internally, or even commissioning new surveys. So various ways to help you with that. But the first level of state is free. It's really great just to have a conversation. We run these webinars every couple of weeks, and even these are a good opportunity just to check in with other members of the community, see what's going on. Fairly light touch. What we try and do is bring in ideas and concepts for us to think about. And often that's just reinforcing perhaps some of what we know, but presenting it in a slightly different way, so you feel that you can go away and actually take some practical actions and tips away for yourselves. I'm going to wind up now. So thanks so much, everyone, and happy Thursday. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and an end of the week. And look forward to the next webinar and speaking to you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for your feedback. Very much indeed. Really appreciated.